Welcome back, everyone, to the Founders Only podcast. I am super excited today to welcome my friend Omeed Tabiei. Omeed is the founder of Optimist Legal, a corporate law firm specializing in guiding startup founders from incorporation to exit. Known as the coolest lawyer ever, Omeed is also a serial entrepreneur who has founded 2 software companies himself and understands the unique challenges of tech startups. Beyond the legal world, he's an adventurer, having climbed the Himalayas and completed 2 10-day silent meditation retreats. Omeed is passionate about building strong relationships with clients and is dedicated to helping founders navigate major business milestones. So welcome again. I am so excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Mia. So happy to be here. I'm stoked to have this conversation.
And so where we begin with everyone is, can you tell me about your journey to becoming the coolest tech lawyer for Optimist Legal?
Yeah. So I think, where the journey starts is, do you remember that game that in the early computer, there was a game called Lemonade Stand? Do you remember that game? Did you ever play that?
I've heard of it. I've heard it. I've never played it, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, so the game was it was a super simple game, on the early computer, because I was born in '88. So I really saw the emergence of the computer. I remember, when my dad got the first computer and, we would go into MS-DOS and do the CD ... backslash sort of thing. And so in the early computer days, there was a game called Lemonade Stand that was a super simple game where you could control certain variables, you could buy a certain number of cups, for example, but the market would fluctuate. The cups might be a certain price one day, they might be a different price another day, and then there were these other variables that maybe you didn't have control over, for example, the weather or whatever. So I loved that game growing up. And the reason why I loved it was just so interesting to me. And this is a story of who I was before I became the coolest lawyer, right? So I tell that story to really tell you about how I loved entrepreneurship from an early age. And I come from, a family of entrepreneurs. For example, my great uncle worked in the bazaars of Iran selling gold. And, rose to become one of the top gold distributors in Iran before the revolution, when he was kicked out of the country and had to essentially restart his business in Thailand. And now he, has a shop 2 shops in Dubai. Amazing businessman, amazing entrepreneur. So I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My mom's dad sold TVs in the 50s, for example. My dad's dad sold, bicycles in the neighborhood. So family of entrepreneurs, okay? And I loved this Lemonade Stand game growing up as a kid. But for whatever reason, I never thought to go into business. What originally inspired me to go to law school was the show Law and Order. I think so many law students watch that show and they're like, oh, this is cool.
I'm a deputy lawyer, by the way, because of Law and Order. I just didn't go to law school formally, but Law and Order.
Pretty much.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got your Law and Order education. That's
exactly.
I get it. And also okay, so I think for all the people listening out there, if you come from a foreign family, for the most part, especially Middle Eastern families, Asian families, that sort of thing, you have 3 options growing up in terms of what you can do. You could be a doctor, you could be a lawyer, or you could be an engineer. That's right. Those are your 3 options.
Mm-hmm.
So, growing up, I think my dad, decided based on what he saw in me that, I was going to be a lawyer and there wasn't really any other option for me. And so he built me or raised me to be a lawyer, made me negotiate for everything. And my dad growing up worked for my uncle in the gold trade in the bazaar when he was growing up as a teenager. And those markets are like very tough. Those businesses are
Yes.
very tough.
Yes.
Especially in the bazaar, like those guys are known to be very shrewd, like, very
Yes.
sharp, great
Yes.
negotiators. They
Yes.
love haggling. They deal with hagglers like all day long. So yeah, my dad pretty much raised me with those kind of teachings, with those understandings, with those learnings, and instilled those things into me, making me, for even the smallest things, I want to go somewhere, like, I have to convince him of why, and he would play devil's advocate, and it would be super annoying, and I'd be like, oh, I hate my dad, or like whatever, and then, yeah, what ended up happening was I really wanted to be a public defender. I'd watched Law and Order, really wanted to be a public defender. I felt, strongly about just making sure that everyone had access to rights. And, I also grew up kind of like angry at dad because of, like this whole thing that I told you about. And so I was like very like anti-authority. So I was like,
Mhm.
I'm going to work at the public defender's office where I'm going to, like fight against the government and that sort of thing. So I worked at the public defender's office through college and law school. But what ended up happening is when I graduated, my graduating class nationally in
Yes.
2013 was one of the largest law school graduating classes in history. It just so happened that when I decided to enroll in law school, everyone else was enrolling in law school as well. So I got out. There wasn't any paying jobs available. Like all of the public defenders' offices were like inundated with applications and interest from law students. Because I went to so many other jurisdictions. I was in Georgia applying to the Georgia public defender's office. Applied at Maryland, DC. That was really the one that I wanted to work at because that's like the best public defender's office in the country. It's the gold standard.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep. And I was like all over the place applying for all these different jobs. And they're like, listen, we got like so many applications right now. We don't know what to do with them. And what ended up happening was my friend was a staffer in Congress and a position opened up in the senator's office. And she was like, hey, we totally can, get you in here and, you'll have a job from day one. So I just did that. And what ended up happening was, working in a governmental position, there was a lot of community contact. And we did a lot of like happy hours and events, community events with, the business people in the community. And I heard the talk, in the space in the community around how specifically a lot of these business owners were helping returning citizens, is what people who have been to jail and come out are referred to. That's like the respectful way to refer to them, returning citizens. And the talk was, oh, these people that are in business do more for returning citizens than any of the government programs, any of the rehabilitation programs. I think the saying at the time was, nothing rehabilitates someone better than a job and a place in society. And when I saw that and I saw how much respect and how much admiration and how much benefit these entrepreneurs brought to the community, I was like, that is so cool. That is so cool. I'm like 100% into it. And it awakened something in me that I didn't even know was there, that took time to like really blossom. And then what ended up happening after that, one of my mentors became the chief legal officer at a company called Hyperloop. Hyperloop was this super fast train that would take you from LA to San Francisco in 30 minutes. It was an idea that was generated by Elon Musk. And then our Hyperloop, Elon and this investor were on an airplane. Elon shared the idea. The investor was like, "Oh, that's a cool idea. I might, put $10 million into this thing." And he ended up doing that. And then it became a thing. They ended up raising, over $100 million, which I helped them with a number of those fundraisers. And that completely just turned my world upside down. That's when I was like, oh my God, business is the coolest thing ever. I've never experienced anything like this before. So exciting, and found that passion for entrepreneurship. And I think what happens when you hang around business people is especially successful business people, is they make it look easy. And so what ended up happening was oh, I could totally do, I could start a startup. this looks simple. So that's how I got to be here. It kind of in this crossover world of, I have all of this experience and training as a lawyer, worked at Hyperloop, worked in-house at a Hollywood studio that sold to private equity for $500 million, went off, worked with Plug and Play, 500 startups, Draper U, kind of all the heavy hitters in the startup space, worked at a big law firm advising, companies and businesses and startups on the employment side. And then 2 years ago, I launched my own law firm, which I never thought that I would do. But I just had I had tried my hand as a software entrepreneur a couple times and saw how hard it was. And I was like, cool, I'm passionate about entrepreneurship and I really want to help other entrepreneurs because I've been through it. I've been successful on one side of it and have found some success as an entrepreneur myself, not the same success as a lot of entrepreneurs have found in terms of, major exits and that sort of thing. But I know what the journey is like, and I want to walk side by side by entrepreneurs to help them in that fight for their dream.
Love it. Love it, love it, love it. So my favorite game back then, I'm 5 years older than you, was similar in the concept of these kind of life strategy games where the different environmental situations impacted what you were decisions you had available to you was Oregon Trail. That was my favorite game. That and Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?
Okay, I love both of those games.
Yeah.
Hat is kind of Carmen Sandiego, actually.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes. And I also, I actually was an entrepreneur very, very young. I had my first business at age 7, but I also wanted to be an attorney. And because 5 years before you graduated, I was trying to decide in 2008 what I was going to do because the economy had collapsed and the mortgage crisis happened when I was a subprime loan officer at the time. And so I was trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I talked to some people who had MBAs and I talked to some people who had law degrees, and everybody who had a law degree said, do not do it, because there's not going to be any jobs when you graduate. My greatest dream was to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer so bad. But what ended up happening was, so when I was in college, I that was way before 2008. I wanted to be an attorney. So I was a paralegal and I worked at these different places you probably heard of, Judicial Watch. And I used to work at a company called Children's Law Center in DC with Matt Fraden, who you might know, who was a professor at UDC, a law professor at UDC. And he was
that's where I went.
Yes, he was also the legal director at Children's Law Center, and I used to be the legal coordinator there at Children's Law Center. So I was kind of crushed when I didn't get to go to law school. So it's interesting to hear your story about what happened when you graduated, but you found your way. So right. Let's talk about, what is your superpower, Omeed?
I would say that my superpower is something that people don't necessarily attribute to lawyers, but I think my superpower is I think communication for sure, which is something that people do attribute to lawyers. I think communication is one of my superpowers. I'm obsessed with negotiation, so I study negotiation all day long. And I think that definitely is like one of my superpowers. But within kind of both of those buckets, I would say that like it's like a mix of like enthusiasm, like ability to relate with others, like to connect with others. And I think something that I do really well that I notice a lot of other lawyers get tripped up on is like, I'll notice that a lot of lawyers like are like so particular about little things that they kind of lose sight of, especially in deals, right? So I'm talking about in deals. They like lose sight. Hey, we're trying to get to the finish line here. It's not like so much about like these like very particular words in this paragraph, but we have a destination that we want to get to. And we're here with someone else who our interests may not be exactly aligned. They're aligned in that we both want the same thing. We want the deal to close, but our ideas of how to get there might be different. So how do we come together to get to that like finish line? And I'm really good at seeing the bigger picture and moving, the conversation, moving the ball into the net. I think, that's what I would say is my superpower.
One of the things I totally notice about you, just from the conversations that we've had before today, is just how helpful you are. So now that you're telling me your story, and I understand like your why behind why you started Optimist Legal, it makes a lot of sense why you are so helpful, because that's really what you're passionate about. You really are passionate about helping founders and business dreamers to live out their dream and do it without getting sued and losing all the potential money that they could make, right? So I love it. What are some factors you suggest founders consider when choosing between an LLC versus a corporation if they plan to be acquired, if that's their exit plan?
Great question. It's one that I have this conversation probably like 20 times a week. So I love it. So between an LLC and a C corporation, I think for most tech founders, a C corporation is going to be what they should incorporate as. And I'll tell you why. So most tech founders, the space is just most familiar with C corporations. Investors are only invest, for the most part. Most traditional VC investors only invest in C corporations. And the reason for that is like, it's a technical issue in terms of they can't invest in LLCs because it creates tax issues for the fund itself. So that's why most investors won't invest in LLCs, because it creates tax issues for the fund. But there are also a number of other reasons why investors will only invest in C corporations. Primarily, LLCs are not equipped to issue stock. They don't issue stock. They issue units in the form of either membership units or profit interest units. And so for that reason, investors will only invest in C corporations. But your question is, when founders are considering what kind of company to start, I think the two primary questions that they should ask themselves are you going to ever potentially anything more than 0% seek venture capital? If the answer to that is yes, I will at some point even consider raising venture capital. Just start it as a C corporation. The reason for that is if you start as an LLC and then you conduct all this business and then you realize, oh, I actually do want to raise venture capital, you're going to have to convert over from an LLC into a C corporation, and that can be quite expensive. Depending on, how much business the business has conducted, how many contracts there are, so on and so forth, all of those documents will need to be converted over into the new entity. So when startup founders come to me, the two questions that I ask them are, do you plan on ever raising venture capital even more than, like, if the answer is there is a 1% chance that we will raise venture capital, like, I'm like, okay, cool. C corporation is like definitely what you should start. And we can get into the complexities, but like even if you started as a C corporation, there are different elections that you can make, to the IRS. For example, you could still elect to be taxed as an S corp, which gives you pretty much the same taxation benefits and so there are like ways that you can play around with it. That's still, if you're like, oh, well, I really want the tax benefit of the LLC, for example, you can elect to be in it. So like, just because you're a C corp doesn't mean that, there aren't different ways that you can massage it to make it more favorable. But the second thing that I often ask people that's really important is, like, what's your vision for the company? If your vision for the company is to, build a sizable company in terms of, you want a team of developers that you're going to have in-house. So if you're going to have a team of developers that you want to have in-house, you're going to want to issue equity to them. You're going to want to issue stocks to them, because that's one of the best ways to incentivize employees, key employees. The tech world, like all across the board, uses stock as a way to incentivize employees. And so you want to be able to access that benefit as well. As I mentioned, LLCs aren't equipped to issue stock. They issue something that are called profit interest units, which are similar but not the same and not as beneficial as stock. And that's not entirely true, but just it's more complex with an LLC to
Always
issue.
more complex.
Yeah, it's just more complex. So based on those two questions of do you ever plan on raising venture capital? Do you plan on hiring a team of developers in house? Like, what's the real vision for the business? Most of the time, for most tech companies, the correct answer is going to be starting as a C corporation. So I would say that is really the thought process in terms of whether to start as an LLC or a C corporation. And just to round the answer out, when should a tech company start as an LLC? A tech company should start as an LLC if they have a 0% chance of raising venture capital. They, maybe are going to self-fund the entire thing. They know they're committed to bootstrapping, for example. If maybe they don't want to grow into 100 million status, they don't want to grow into unicorn status. They know that they want to maybe, be a $10 million tech company or a $5 million tech company or a $2 million tech company. And that's okay. They're okay with, the 15 to 20% year over year growth. And that's fine. Maybe they'll always use outsourced developers, for example. They don't ever plan on bringing the developer team in-house. They want to keep it small. They want, so that would make most sense to start as an LLC. And in terms of that final piece of the question, to set up for an acquisition, the structure of the business, for the most part, won't really impact ultimately the acquisition. The acquirer is going to acquire the business oftentimes as an asset deal anyway, for the most part. So for that reason, the consideration of the structure of the entity that they're acquiring isn't of the greatest or utmost importance. I would actually say that the structure of the entity is of the greatest utmost importance in the journey of the business to getting to acquisition.
Makes sense. Okay. One side question about this then. So I've heard that, the first thing you should do is validate a business idea, right? You should test it in the market and see what it is. So for my case, right, I already have an LLC. So if I have this LLC already and I want to validate the business idea first before I actually create a new entity as a C corporation, if I have this vision of potentially getting VC funding sometime in the future, then I'm thinking that this might happen quite a bit for service companies who maybe want to develop another business and they have an idea in the process of owning already an existing entity, that they already have a banking structure and all the documentation and all that stuff set up so that they can actually go to market, collect money, validate the idea. Do you have any thoughts on how long or at what point you would say an idea is valid? What would be your at the point where you would suggest to your clients or to someone in a general conversation, what would be your point of reference where they should say, okay, this is valid. I should quickly get something set up so that, I know I've already collected some funds, but ideally I'm thinking not too much funds before
Yeah.
you actually go ahead and create that C corporation.
Yeah. I get that question. Like, when should they think about starting a standalone entity as a C corporation, especially if they're in testing phase, for example, or validation phase? Well, I have like two thought processes about this. The first thought process is, I think as soon as you feel that you have validation is probably the time to start the entity. But at that point, it's important to consider, have you hired developers, for example, to build the MVP? Those developers probably contracted with the LLC to create that initial product. So that initial product is going to be likely owned by the LLC and will need to be transferred to the C corporation via some contracts like IP assignments and so on and so forth that you'll need to secure. My second thought process about this is actually contrary to like what you just the picture that you painted. My thought process is, okay, so we're considering an instance where the founder is looking to validate an idea. But my whole thing is, like, I think that when you start a business, it also is incredibly important to be all in on the business and like committed to the business to the point where it's like, okay, I have a sense of what this market needs, and I'm going to create a product for this market. And maybe it won't be this exact product that like is going to be for this market, but I'm going to iterate on that product to the point where I know that at some point I'm going to find validation for it because I plan on working on it for the next 10 years. And that level of commitment to a business idea, I think, is like more rare. I think it is more rare, but like that level of conviction is, I think, what is required to succeed in business. And if you're coming to an idea from that place, then just, start as a C corporation from the beginning. So that's,
I love that. I love that answer. Oh, I love that answer. Okay. So one of the other things that a lot of business owners, as they have whether it's tech or just a general business, right? They build a website. And with the website, many of us know we have to have terms of service, terms and conditions, privacy policies, and all kinds of things. So a lot of US-based companies, which I believe most of our listeners are US-based founders, so they may not necessarily need to be concerned with GDPR, at least not at the level, and you will correct me if I'm wrong, at the level that they might need to be if they are based in Europe or if they have EU customers or users on their website. However, I know that California has some very unique, rigid or stringent compliance and regulations around privacy and just overall use. So what are some of those differences? Because it seems to me that if you are a US-based business, not working with customers in the EU, you still have to put some things in place to, at the very least, to protect yourself if you're national for or California. What are some of those key differences if you are a US based business that you need to make sure you have in place on day one?
Yeah, differences between GDPR and CCPA, and what are those key differences? Heard. Before I answer that question, I do want to add one more thing to the C corporation answer. I just want to make sure that I don't get reamed by all of my fellow lawyers out there. So what's really important to know about starting a C corporation is there's also something called QSBS, Qualified Small Business Stock. Why it's beneficial to start as a C corporation, and this actually specifically answers your question of to set up for acquisition or exit. You can forego capital gains tax for up to $10 million. So when you sell your company, if you sell it for $10 million, you will be exempt from capital gains tax for that $10 million amount for up to $10 million. Whoa. So at the time of exit, that is huge. So that's another reason people should think about starting C corporations, especially with the exit in mind. QSBS is huge. So there's that point.
Yes. Yeah,
C corporation all the way. But now I'm going to go back to your question around the difference between GDPR, CCPA, where does it apply, how does it apply, so on and so forth. So what's important for founders to know here is that it deals with GDPR and CCPA deal with data collection. So it's less about where the company itself is located, and it's more about where are your consumers located. So for US-based businesses, if any of your users are located in the EU, you will be subject to GDPR. And you need to have the proper protections in place and the proper procedures to manage the data of those EU residents. So you will be subject to GDPR if you have any users that are based in the EU. And for all the B2B SaaS founders out there, if they're contracting with enterprise users, those enterprise are going to require quite robust policies. For example, we just had to help one of our clients. They're doing a deal with a huge enterprise customer, and we had to help them get a data processing agreement in place, and that DPA, the data processing agreement, required them to have a data processing agent in the EU, which you can, there are third-party companies that you can go and pay like $99 a year to, get a data processing agent in
like a registered agent.
Yeah, exactly. Similar. But then they had to build infrastructure internally, to make sure that the data is managed and sequestered and so on and so forth. And, so there were steps that they had to take to get into compliance.
So then sorry. One question. To follow up on that. It does sound like then, are you saying on day one, it's kind of the same scenario with the C Corp, what do you think is the long-term vision here? Do you think you might have customers in the EU at some point in the future? Maybe you should get those systems and protocols in place and policies in place on day one rather than having to reverse engineer that kind of stuff.
Definitely. I mean, where your marketing or your sales is going to be targeted, right? And so if you are targeting enterprise, for sure they're going to require you to be SOC 2 certified, and able to process GDPR data, and you're not going to be able to close those contracts without having those things in place. So if you know that that's the angle that you want to take, that is going to have to be, those things are going to have to be in place before the contract gets closed. So to, streamline the process, of course, like you definitely, but it's expensive. SOC 2 is like $60,000, $40,000 to get it implemented. And so these are important considerations to keep in mind. But yeah, I think, if you know that that's something that you're going to do, then for sure, have that in the product roadmap. So, but CCPA is a little less applicable for probably a lot of the founders out there because it applies to businesses that are in California or serve California residents. So either. But the threshold for CCPA is annual revenue of 25 million. So I think that probably is not a lot of the founders out there because that would be later stage founders, or they process the data of a minimum of 100,000 customers. So either they have annual revenues of 25 million or they process the data of 100,000 customers. If neither of those are true, then you are not bound by CCPA. So CCPA only applies if you have annual revenue of 25 million or you process the data of 100,000 customers if you're a business in California or serve any California residents. And in terms of, we can get into the real detailed stuff. I think some of the most important differences are CCPA also requires a do not sell my data. So CCPA is really focused explicitly on sale of the data, whereas GDPR is more about the management of the data and so on and so forth. And I think those are, for the most part, the biggest differences between them. Penalties for GDPR, 4% of global revenue or 20 million euros, whichever one is higher. I think, we saw Google get hit with a huge GDPR fine. And then CCPA is 2,500 per violation or 7,500 for intentional violation. So those could rack up as well, but obviously, so not as potentially
not
harmful.
something we want to do. Not something we want to do. So for the GDPR, if you have, if you're putting those, let's say if you don't have those policies in place and you, at least at the time, don't intend for people in the EU to use your service or to collect marketing contact information or data from them on your website, can you tell them this? Can you state this on your website and let them know this website and application and services are not intended for customers, businesses, consumers based in the EU, and we may not be compliant. I don't know if we want to say that, but could you say anything to kind of protect yourself? And furthermore, maybe even, disallow certain IPs or disallow certain countries to be selected from a country drop down on a contact form or something like that. Or if they do choose that, have some notice presented if they select an EU-based country, something like that. Could you do that to support yourself? Okay.
Yeah, you totally could. You could block them from using the software. Yeah.
If you're not assuming you're not intending to do enterprise deals that, I understand completely when you're saying enterprise, they have staff based in these other places. And so therefore you have to, I understand. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk now about I think the thing that just really throws so many people for a loop, and really it seems to be something that people, the average lay person, just can't wrap their mind around the nuances of this, is intellectual property protection. So
meet Brandy, your all-in-one content creation sidekick designed to make creating and managing your brand's content effortless. Let me show you how it works. Got a team? Bring them in. With Brandy, everyone can pitch in to create content that clicks. Managing multiple brands? Easily switch between profiles so you're always ready for the next project. The Brand Voice Analyzer ensures your content always sounds like you. Stuck on where to start? Check out our handy prompt templates. They're like creative jumpstarts to get things moving. Every edit, every version saved. With content revision history, nothing gets lost, and you can always pick up right where you left off. Everything your brand needs, it's all right here in your brand asset library. Stay organized like a pro with custom folders for every project. No more hunting for that one file. Brandy does too, and is ready to help you connect. Or in any language, really. Speak to your audience in the words they know best. Need ideas or have questions? Just ask Brandy. Save time with custom snippets. Your most used phrases, always handy when you need them. Keep your notes, links, and ideas in one spot, so you're never hunting for that one piece of inspiration. Get personalized content tips and SEO strategies to help your brand stand out online. Join Brandy today and make your content creation smarter, faster, and better. Let's create something amazing.
If we are considering exits or acquisitions, what are some of the things that we need to have in place? And really, at what point do we need to consider these things? Is this another consideration on day one? Figure out what your exit strategy is on day one and set yourself up at day one to kind of prepare for transfer of IP at that point?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, I'm an idealist in a lot of ways. I mean, the name of my law firm is literally Optimist Legal. So, I think that people should run their businesses from day one as if they're going to exit. And I think the reason for that is an exit ready business is anyone who wants to buy your business. The reason why they want to buy your business is because you have a great business. So why wouldn't you want to run your business as exit ready from day one? You if you run your business as exit ready from day one, you're running a great business that you could sell at any time. But at the end of the day, you also don't have to sell it. You could keep it and just have a great business. And so with that being said, I said that just to address this question of how should people envision running their business? How people should envision running their business is, I'm going to sell this thing one day. And so I should really run it as if I'm prepared to. Because I think so many entrepreneurs kind of operate haphazardly. It's a lot of work to run a business itself and build a business, let alone maintain and clean and tidy and housekeep and all that kind of stuff is challenging. I know a lot of entrepreneurs that use ChatGPT for contracts all the way through, and they're like a one-man show and they do it all and they crush it, and that's great for them. Not necessarily how I would recommend running a business, but it works for them until it doesn't. And the whole nature of legal, and one of my things that I don't really like about legal is people don't understand the importance of it until shit hits the fan. And then you learn really difficult lessons at that point. And that's one of the things that I don't love about the nature of our work, is that people don't appreciate the value of it until things go wrong. But to answer your question with respect to IP, one of the most important aspects of IP for founders is just making sure that you get your IP assignments. And so I've talked about this on a few other podcasts as well. I'm out here charging the banner of the importance of it. Because it really is a benign contract. It's very standard. If you've ever been employed at any sort of company, you have signed an IP assignment. The IP assignment typically comes with your offer letter or your employment contract. And it can be a 1-page contract. It can be a 4-page contract. But essentially what the IP assignment says is, I am working with this company. And as I work with this company, everything that I create for this company is owned by this company. And usually there's a section in the IP assignment that says, here are other things that I may be inventing, that I may be creating, or that I may have created. These things are not going to be owned by the company. But everything else that I create, during the 9 to 5 on the equipment of the business, so on and so forth, is going to be owned by this company. And it's really important to get this because investors are always going to look for these IP assignment agreements, and acquirers will literally not do a deal if these contracts are not in place. And you need to get these contracts from anyone who's ever created anything for your company. So any employee, any consultant, any vendor, all need to have IP assignments as part of their contract, so that the chain of custody of all of the creations that have ever been created for the company are owned by the company, because you never know what could happen. If you don't get an IP assignment from someone, later in the future, the gray area-ness of the understanding leaves an opening for them to potentially bring action against the company to say that they have some sort of ownership interest. So we want to make it incredibly clear and explicit. Anything that you create for us, owned by us. That's super important for founders to know. The other thing too is trademarks. If you're out there, you're going to create a brand, and whether it's a name, a slogan, whatever it is, and you're going to build all this goodwill in the market around the name of your company, for example. Well, that's an asset of the company that really needs to be owned by the company. And acquirers are going to look for that, especially if they're interested in the brand of the company. Now, if it's going to be a merger and so on and so forth, you're getting, acquired by some very large enterprise customer that's going to, make your brand defunct, then not so important. But it's still, you don't know, right? So you want to make sure that you lock down your assets, because those are valuable assets. You're putting a lot of time and effort and money and energy into building those assets up. So you want to own them. I'd say some other IP considerations, something that some founders do, especially if they're being copied, is they'll copyright. They'll copyright their source code. They'll copyright their web pages, for example. Oftentimes we'll see founders do that if some copycat pops up. If a copycat pops up, you hire a lawyer. That lawyer will rush and file a copyright, on your web pages, or whatever it might be that's being copied, and then you can bring a copyright suit once a copyright has been filed. But you have less if you file before you actually need the copyright, like within the first year of the creation of whatever it is that was created, you actually have access to greater remedies than if you file kind of like off the cuff when something happens after this filing timeline. And then the last one is patents. And with respect to patents, there are different people that have different viewpoints with respect to patents. For the most part, I think with, and I'm not a patent lawyer, but I'm just gonna, kind of give some general information here. Patents are good in that, again, you're building up your intellectual property storehouse, your intellectual property library. You're kind of asset stable. But I think patents in software can be a bit challenging. It's just different than hardware, for example. Software patents are a little easier for, someone to come and iterate on that software patent and create something novel enough for them to, kind of bypass the patent in that respect. So a lot of VCs actually don't even really care for patents. And yeah, a lot of not a lot, but some subsection of VCs think that software patents are useless, but that just depends on a case by case basis.
Sure. And especially with the amount of software companies who are building on top of other, LLMs and things like that, I assume that the patents live there. And as soon as you iterate, just enough to have a distinguished vertical product that serves a unique purpose separate from the purpose of the original patent, I assume that that's very commonly happening, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I always like when people come to me and they're like, "Oh, I have this idea, I want to protect an idea." I'm like, the best way that you could protect your idea is just like execute on it and build like such a committed audience and customer base, and that really will be your moat. There isn't anything more concrete to hold on to in the IP space, other than for software, other than like, just build your true fan base that is like wild about whatever your product is.
Love it. I want to talk legal horror stories. Let's just pick one. Let's pick one legal horror story that illustrates some of the biggest mistakes you've seen founders make. Doesn't have to be during fundraising stage, just one really big snafu that you've seen as a cautionary tale, right?
Yes. Gosh, there's like so many. But the one that I always love to pick is it's my own legal horror story. So for my second software company, we launched a marketplace for holistic healers. It was called Kind Souls. So you could go on our marketplace and you could find Reiki healers, you could find meditators, you could find energy healers, that sort of thing. And the way that I created the software company was I'm not a technical person. Like I understand, code to a certain extent. I can talk with engineers and I understand the development process. I think if you like go through the software development process enough times and you spend enough time around software engineers, like you just like pick up the language and understand. But I'm not a technical, like I don't code, right? So I had this friend who I had known him since high school. And I built that company in 2018. I graduated high school in 2006. So we'd known each other for 12 years. We were friends. Like we had the same group of friends. We knew each other. And I pitched him the idea on the marketplace for holistic healers. And he's like, "Oh, this is like exactly the thing that I've been looking for." Like, he was a very successful, like CTO level coder up until that point. So, very high level coder, like, Top Gun kind of guy. And I was like, this is perfect. He likes the idea. And he was like, everything I've worked on up until this point, I haven't really felt that strongly about, but this is something that I feel that I could get behind because the mission of it is like to heal the world and it's like meaningful and all this stuff. And that's why, I want to be a part of this. And I'm like, cool. Well, okay, I'm a lawyer, so, we're going to talk about these things. Okay, you'll get, 50% equity, but obviously it's going to vest over 4 years. Let's, just like run with this thing and, see how far we can take it. And, we'll get the paperwork piece figured out as we go along and just see how things are. Also, like I knew this guy for like 12 years. Like, we had the same group of friends. We would hang out every day. Like, so I was like, this is my brother. Like, and sure, I've been a lawyer. I've seen this instance happen, so many other times, but that's not going to happen to me. Like I've known this guy for such a long time. Like, essentially what happened was, we were finding some traction, some success. I think we had like something like 200 users in our marketplace. So, it wasn't a small amount of users. And one day I get a call from him and he's like, "Hey, there was this company. It was like the new Zillow. that was being created. And they gave me a call through a recruiter. They offered me a position as CTO of this company. They're giving me like the best salary that I've ever been offered. They're giving me, stock in the company, like executive level stock. So I don't think I can work on this marketplace anymore. I don't have time to dedicate towards building this marketplace anymore. And I was like, all right, well, dude, I'm happy for you, like that's great. And he's like, well, I want my 50% equity. And I was like, but that was supposed to happen over 4 years. Like, you are saying now you don't have time to work on this startup anymore. So I think one of the big mistakes that startup founders make early on in terms of horror stories is putting off, the necessary agreements, the necessary understandings, the necessary contracts. And I've seen it time and time again. This is a story. We just, did a buyout not too long ago for two co-founders. It's just a hard relationship. It's a difficult relationship. The person that you initially decide to go into business with, we change as human beings. We're constantly changing. And so it's so important to get those like understandings in writing and have all of the different conversations. And even sometimes when you have like all the different conversations of understanding of how the business is going to run and you have all those contracts, it still doesn't save you. It really is just protection, because what ended up happening is that co-founder actually locked me out of all of the software. He locked me out of the software, and it was like this big fight, and I didn't want to sue my friend and go through that process. I was like, all right, I'll just rebuild it. It's fine. And so, contracts would have helped in that instance, obviously, because, the 4 years would have been in writing. It would have been like clearly understood. There would have been a mechanism for us to understand how we would have exited the process. So yeah, that's a horror story. Another horror story is, imagine going and, raising funding, and you're all excited. You have this investor on board, and there are two ways that this story can go. One way is, and both are horror stories. One way is, at the time of exit, you get like a really amazing offer for an acquirer to buy your company that like could potentially be life-changing money for your family. And then the investor says no. They veto the exit. And now you are ready to sell your company, but the investor has vetoed the sale of your company because maybe it wasn't enough of a multiple for them to realize the type of investment, or maybe their portfolio is underperforming, for example, and they really need that big win, and they were hoping that you would be that big win. So that's one potential horror story. Another potential horror story is, in the terms where you negotiate, you give too big of a liquidation preference. And so what ends up happening, at the time of investment, maybe you gave away too much liquidation preference, like you didn't run the numbers in terms of the liquidation preference that you were offering to the investor. And what ends up happening is that you get nothing at the time of exit, literally $0.
Break that one down, please. How did that happen?
How that happens is, let's say the investor invests $1 million, okay? And like liquidation preference just means that at the time of exit, they're going to get their investment times some sort of multiple, right? So standard liquidation preference, for example, would be like a 1x liquidation preference. So at the time of exit, they're going to get 1x their investment. So they will get their 1 million back, and then they'll convert, for example, over into common stock, and then they'll get a percentage of whatever the remainder of the exit is. But let's say, just for ridiculous hypothetical purposes, you offer them a 10x liquidation preference, and then you sell for 10 million. Well, what ends up happening is they're guaranteed a 10x liquidation preference on their investment. If you only sold for 10 million, they're going to get the entirety of that 10 million.
But people don't do dumb stuff like that, right?
This is a thing that happens. This is a thing that happens.
We're not going to go down. Okay.
That's why it's so important to actually run the calculations. Sure, you might not offer a 10x liquidation preference, but you might offer like a 2 to 3x and then make it a participating preference, for example, where, you know, they get 3 million and then on top of that, you know, they convert into common stock at the time of the exit, and then, you know, plus their 3 million, they get an additional whatever percentage their ownership is, and they might make out better than you if you don't run, you know, these various exercises of, okay, if I'm offering them these terms at this exit level, here's how much I'm going to walk away with, here's how much they're going to walk away with. You need to run those various scenarios to understand what the implication of the terms that you're offering are going to be. Got
it. So let's talk now about one of my favorite topics, content. Content is often about just storytelling. And how do you ensure your brand's voice for Optimist Legal stays authentic and resonates with your target audience or ICP as you scale Optimist Legal?
Yeah, this is something that I work on a lot, actually. And I have a bi-weekly mastermind that I run. That's a LinkedIn creator mastermind. So about 10 of us or so meet twice a week to talk about things like voice, content planning, content strategy, you know, those sorts of things, all focused on LinkedIn. And it's free. So if anyone wants to join, you know, feel free to reach out to me. I'll add you. It's a WhatsApp group. We meet twice a week, every Monday, every other Monday.
Go ahead and add me to that. Thank you.
Okay, cool. You're in. And I think that for me, at least, I just show up as I am, you know? So I love memes. I love being silly. I love being sarcastic. I love, kind of, you know, more like gritty, tongue-in-cheek humor, more like, you know, I like to poke fun at things, kind of that whole like kind of sarcastic voice. And this is part of what makes me the coolest lawyer ever, is like I'm not just dry facts or information. You know, I love memes. I love to be silly. I love to be playful. I really, like, the way that I see the world is often by like seeing something and being like, that doesn't really like land right, and so I'll like make fun of it, for example. Or I also love like hard hitting, kind of punchy things that kind of make you feel like you've just been punched in the nose. Like, wow, that was like a harsh truth. Love stuff like that. So I just incorporate these different elements, or I try. And, you know, have been learning more and more how to show up and communicate in these different voice styles, and tweaking them and honing them to really make them resonate with the audience as much as possible.
Now, how about for the non-meme content, right? As an attorney, you are surely, well, I assume you're writing content that is very advisor level content, thought leadership content around, you know, situations and recommendations and strategic insights and things like that. How do you incorporate this punchy sense of humor? Are you saying that you just kind of keep that side as a separate type of content? And if so, when you are writing this thought leadership content, or however you're producing it, when you're writing the content, that whether it's becoming a video or written content, how are you still making sure your voice is in there, but so to differentiate you, but still be professional and corporate and give the information in a way that a prospect, for example, will not think, okay, he's making light of something that's a serious situation. I don't want to work with him because he thinks everything is a joke, and I don't want my attorney to think everything is a joke, and I'm sure that's not you. So talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have like a better answer other than like just show up as you are. Like for me, the way that I create, what's coming up for me in response to this question is it's the way that I create content. So I sit in front of a blank screen, and based on my experiences, based on the conversations, based on my history of practice over the last 10 years, I'll sit in front of this blank screen and I will literally just dump whatever comes into my brain onto this blank screen, and it'll be really raw, and it'll sometimes it may not even necessarily make sense, or it'll just be like very like sporadic thoughts, and then it's in the editing that it really gets cleaned up. But even in the thought leadership content pieces, I still find ways to kind of say little sarcastic things in there, maybe, or tongue-in-cheek things. I think the voice just comes out, because so much of my content also is written inspirationally. What I mean by that is like something happens in the moment where I'm like, ooh, people should know about that. For example, I wrote a piece of content the other day that did relatively well, which I think you commented on, which was on the VAs, about how people misclassify VAs. That was like just like in the moment where I was like noticing, based on the masterminds that I've been in and the groups that I've been in and so on and so forth, everyone is hiring these VAs, but thinks that, they are independent contractors, even though they have them working from 9 to 5 and they manage every piece of their work and so on and so forth. And I was like, ooh, I could really punch some people in the nose with this information here. Like, in a good way, like, hey, wake up,
Right.
There's something happening here that you need to pay attention to.
Sure. Okay, so what is, and this is one of my favorite questions that I ask founders, what is one book or resource or podcast that has profoundly impacted your perspective and mindset as a founder?
Oh God, I have so many. I'm a personal development junkie. So like I try to take every program. I try to read every book. So yeah, I have done like so many retreats. I'm trying to think of how many I've done this year. I've done at least one. But this year was like a slow year for retreats. Like last year, I'm pretty sure I did like between 3 to 5 retreats last year. So, I'll do 2 retreats because at the end of this year, I'm actually going to do a 3-day silent meditation retreat over the new year. So that'll be my second one for this year. But my favorite book. Okay, I think that my favorite book is. Oh God, this is so hard. I have to Well,
think about the one that is the one that you were either while you were reading it, you were like, oh my God, that is so good. Oh my God. Or when you put it down, you were like, I'm a whole new person. Like my outlook on how I'm approaching this or that, whether it's this in my life, this in my work, or what have you, you just feel like you had a mindset shift.
I got it. I have 2 actually.
Okay. All right.
Okay. So how I typically answer this question, I'll give you my typical answer and then I'll give you my new answer. My typical answer is a book called The Big Leap. The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. I read it in 2017. And I started reading it in the morning, and by evening I had finished the whole like 250 page book, because I was like so obsessed. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I like felt my life changing as I was reading it. And then I finished reading it around like 8-9 o'clock, and then I stayed up like pretty much all night turning this 200 page book into a PowerPoint presentation. I converted the book into a PowerPoint presentation because I was like, this book is so powerful that I want to turn it into another format to like really digest the information. And then I became such a fanatic that like anyone who would let me give this presentation to them, like I just like went around. I was working at a law firm at the time, and I remember I gave the presentation to like everybody at this law firm. I have an email thread where like I've forwarded that presentation probably like 50 people now. Like the thread is just like everyone that I've like forwarded the presentation to. I will send it to you. You'll be 51. You will be 51. But the whole premise of the book is the premise of the book is, here's where we are. We all like have somewhere that we want to be, and it's about making the leap from where we are to where we want to be and what stands in that gap. And Gay Hendricks is like, he's a very famous psychotherapist and relationship counselor and so on and so forth. And so he's developed a number of different concepts and principles. For example, one of the concepts that he's developed is called the upper limit problem, the ULP. The upper limit problem is essentially like a thermostat that we've set. So we want to be here, we're here, but you know what often ends up happening is we'll take 2 steps and then we'll hit our upper limit problem, which is the ceiling of like success or love or happiness or whatever that we've like predeterminedly set for ourselves that we don't even know that we've set, and it keeps preventing us from getting to where we want to be, which is up here, which might be 2 more steps from where we typically get to. And the way that he breaks it down and the way that he suggests overcoming it is like so beautiful and so intricate, and yeah, just super powerful book. So that's what I typically say is what my most life-changing book is. But I would say that recently I read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I actually did a book club that was like 6 or 7 guys. We came together to read this book together. And discuss what our understanding of both the application of the book as well as some like deep conversations around what the meaning of our lives is. It was like a 6-week book club that I ran. Nice. And I would say that book has fundamentally transformed my life, because I think for most entrepreneurs, most founders out there, we all have a vision for what we want to create, and there is suffering in that process of trying to get to what we want to create.
Deep suffering.
Yes. A lot of suffering.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that book gave me a new perspective, because so often, I think for me especially, in that journey of creating something and the suffering, like I can either get lost in it or I can forget, like, why does it have to be so hard? I can like play victim. But he has a really beautiful perspective on how to have a relationship with suffering in a way that transforms suffering for us, if we can remember in those moments to properly orient ourselves in relation to the suffering. And he has like a bunch of mechanisms and things for how he does that.
Love it. Love that. Okay. Definitely gotta check out those and my PowerPoint. Okay.
I got you.
Where can people find you on social media, Omeed?
Yeah. So you can find me on Facebook, just search my name. You can find me on LinkedIn, just search my name. And then on Instagram, I'm at SaaSBizLawyer, SaaSBiz Lawyer, SaaSBizLawyer on Instagram. But I'm not hard to find, so I have quite a presence all over the internet. So please reach out, connect. Would love to support however I can. And yeah, would love to connect with any of the founders out there. So thanks so much.
Well, thanks so much, everyone, for joining Omeed and I today. Thank you so much, Omeed, for such a fun, wonderful conversation and very enlightening for many of us who are so struggling with the legal considerations that we constantly are encountering as we are building our businesses and growing our businesses. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Bye, everyone.